In July 1948, the quiet sands of Somerton Beach near Adelaide, Australia, became the stage for one of the most perplexing mysteries in history. A well-dressed man, clad in a crisp suit and polished shoes, was found slumped against the seawall. He carried no identification, no wallet, no passport, and not a single clue to reveal who he was. His pockets contained only ordinary items: a bus ticket, a used train stub, and a packet of cigarettes, though even the cigarettes didn't match the brand of the pack. The police quickly realized they were dealing with a case that defied logic and one that would haunt investigators for decades. NTHE Man's appearance only deepened the mystery. He was in remarkable physical condition, with the posture and physique of someone who may have had military training. His suit was pressed, but the labels had been deliberately removed from every piece of clothing, as though someone, or perhaps he himself, wanted to erase all traces of identity. Even his shoes were unusually clean, far too clean for someone who had been walking around on a sandy beach. The autopsy revealed something even stranger. The man's organs showed signs of poisoning, yet no trace of any known toxin could be found. Experts examined his body repeatedly, but science could not provide an answer. Days later, investigators made a shocking discovery. Hidden in a tiny pocket sewn into the man's trousers was a scrap of paper. On it were the words "Tamam shud," Persian for "it is finished." The phrase had been torn from a book, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Police appealed to the public, and miraculously, a man came forward with the very book from which the paper had been ripped. In the margins of the book was a strange code, a series of letters and symbols that to this day has never been definitively cracked. This clue led detectives to the door of a young nurse living nearby, known as Jessica Thompson. When shown the man's body, her reaction was startling. She nearly fainted, though she insisted she did not know him. Investigators became convinced she was withholding information, but her connection to the case remained frustratingly opaque. Some speculated the man was a spy, caught in the dangerous games of Cold War espionage, while others believed it was a case of tragic romance, with Jessica at the center. Despite decades of research, forensic analysis, and even exhumations, the identity of the man, forever known as the Somerton Man, remains shrouded in secrecy. New DNA studies in recent years have hinted at possible family connections, but no definitive answers have been established. Each piece of evidence, from the coded message to the cryptic connection with Jessica, feels like part of a puzzle designed to confuse rather than clarify. NTHE Somerton Man's death continues to haunt investigators not just because of the unanswered questions, but because it feels like a story ripped from a spy novel, except this one was real. Who was he? Why was he in Adelaide? Was he a spy, a lover, or simply an unlucky traveler? Until the final answers emerge, if they ever do, his case stands as one of the world's most haunting unexplained deaths. In 1981, the tranquil setting of Keddie, California, was forever stained by an act of violence so brutal and mysterious that investigators are still haunted by it today. Cabin 28 at the Ketty Resort became the scene of one of the most infamous unsolved murders in American history, a case so disturbing that it continues to terrify anyone who learns its details. And on the morning of April 12, 1981, 14-year-old Sheila Sharp returned home from a friend's house to find a scene of unimaginable horror. Inside Cabin 28, her mother, Sue Sharp, her brother John, and his friend Dana Wingate were dead, slain in a frenzy of violence. They had been beaten, stabbed, and bludgeoned in a way that suggested rage far beyond normal comprehension. The bodies were bound with medical tape and electrical cords, leaving investigators baffled as to who could carry out such brutality and why. NBUT, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the crime was what Sheila didn't find. 3 children, her younger siblings Rick, Greg, and Tina, had been in the house that night. Rick and Greg were discovered unharmed in their bedroom, seemingly oblivious to the carnage that had occurred just down the hall. But Tina, the 12-year-old daughter, was missing. Her disappearance would deepen the horror, transforming a shocking murder into an even darker mystery. NTHE Cabin itself was filled with clues, but they only raised more questions. There were multiple weapons used, including a hammer and a knife that had been bent from the sheer force of the attack. Blood was found throughout the living room, smeared across furniture and walls, but no fingerprints that could conclusively identify the killer were recovered. The level of violence suggested more than one assailant, leading to speculation that at least 2 people were involved. Investigators began looking into suspects, including local men with known criminal backgrounds. A man named Martin Smart, who lived nearby, became a focus of suspicion. His wife later told authorities that Martin had confessed to killing Sue Sharp and her children, allegedly motivated by jealousy and resentment. Yet, despite these chilling allegations, no charges were ever filed. Another local man, Bo Bubidi, also fell under suspicion, but evidence tying him to the crime was circumstantial at best. The case took an even darker turn 3 years later when Tina's skeletal remains were discovered miles away in a remote wooded area. The discovery confirmed what many had feared. She had not escaped, but had become another victim of the horrific crime. Yet, despite this grim finding, investigators were no closer to solving the case. And over the decades, the Ketty Cabin murders have generated countless theories. Some believe it was a targeted attack on Sue, who may have been standing up for another woman against an abusive man. Others argue that the killings had the marks of a personal vendetta, perhaps tied to hidden secrets within the small, tightly knit community. There are also those who suspect a police cover-up, pointing to mishandled evidence and the apparent protection of certain suspects. What continues to haunt investigators most is the sheer brutality of the crime. It was not just murder, it was overkill, a display of rage and cruelty that suggested deep personal motives. Yet if the killers were known to the victims, why has no definitive evidence ever surfaced? How could such a violent act, involving multiple people and so much evidence, remain unsolved for more than 4 decades? And even today, as cold case detectives and independent researchers revisit the files, Cabin 28 looms as a ghostly reminder of unanswered questions. The cabin itself was eventually demolished, perhaps to erase the stain of what happened there, but the memory cannot be torn down. The faces of Sue, John, Dana, and Tina still haunt the town of Ketty, and the unanswered mystery of who killed them remains one of the darkest shadows over American crime history. In December of 1948, a man's body was discovered slumped against a seawall on Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia. He was neatly dressed in a suit and tie, his polished shoes oddly clean for someone lying on sand. He had no wallet, no identification, and all the tags had been carefully cut out of his clothing. To this day, he is known only as the Somerton Man, and his death remains one of the most baffling mysteries in modern history. At first glance, authorities thought it might be a simple case, perhaps a homeless man or someone who died of natural causes. But the details quickly unraveled into something stranger. The autopsy revealed that the man had not died of heart failure or stroke. Instead, his organs showed signs consistent with poisoning. Yet, no trace of any known poison could be found. His body seemed to defy medical explanation, leaving doctors unable to determine how exactly he had died. NTHE items he carried were no less mysterious. In his pockets were a train ticket, a bus ticket, a comb, and half a pack of gum. There was also a pack of cigarettes, but oddly, the brand on the outside of the packet didn't match the cigarettes inside. It was as though his belongings had been arranged with intention or misdirection. NTHE's greatest clue appeared weeks later when police searched deeper into his clothing. Hidden in a tiny fob pocket of his pants was a scrap of paper with 2 words printed on it, Tamam Shud. Translated from Persian, it means, "It is finished," or "the end." The phrase had been torn from a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a book of poetry that meditates on life, fate, and death. This discovery shifted the case from strange to chilling. NTHE police issued a nationwide hunt for the source of the torn page. Incredibly, a man came forward saying that he had found a copy of the Rubaiyat tossed into the back seat of his car, which had been parked near Somerton Beach around the time the body was discovered. Inside the book, the final page was missing, the exact page from which Tom Shud had been torn. Even stranger, faint indentations on the book's rear cover revealed what appeared to be a code, a series of random letters arranged in no discernible pattern. Was it a cipher? A message? A name? Cryptographers from across the world tried to crack it, but none succeeded. Some believed it was the initials of a poem. Others thought it was a secret intelligence code. The possibility of espionage soon emerged, especially given the timing. The Cold War had just begun, and Adelaide was near sensitive military facilities. The Somerton man's refined appearance, lack of identification, and strange belongings all fueled speculation that he may have been a spy who was silenced. Another strange lead connected the case to a woman named Jessica Thompson, a nurse who lived near where the body was found. When police showed her the book with the code, she nearly fainted. She denied knowing the man, but some investigators suspected she was lying. Years later, it emerged that she had given birth to a son around the same time, and that child bore an uncanny resemblance to the Somerton man, sparking theories that the two may have been linked by a hidden relationship. Despite decades of investigation, the mystery of the Somerton Man has never been fully solved. Who was he? Why were the labels cut from his clothing? Was Tamam Shud a message of suicide, or the calling card of an assassination? Was the unbreakable code truly a cipher, or just meaningless letters written by a dying man? Even in recent years, new scientific efforts have tried to uncover his identity. DNA extracted from his remains suggests possible connections to families in Europe, but nothing definitive has closed the case. The questions remain as haunting now as they were on that December morning. Was the Somerton Man a lost soul who chose to end his life with a final cryptic message? Or was he silenced in the shadows of international espionage, his death disguised as unsolvable? NTHE answers lie buried with him, leaving investigators and armchair detectives alike to wonder what secrets Somerton Beach still holds. In February of 1959, a group of 9 experienced hikers set off on a winter trek through the Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. Led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, the team included students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, all seasoned outdoorsmen who were well prepared for the harsh conditions. Their goal was to reach Otorten Mountain, but they never arrived. What happened to them in those frozen peaks has become one of the most chilling and perplexing unsolved mysteries of the 20th century, the infamous Dyatlov Pass incident. When the hikers failed to return on schedule, search parties were dispatched. Weeks later, rescuers discovered their campsite on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, known ominously as Dead Mountain. What they found defied explanation. The hikers' tent was still standing but badly damaged, and it had been cut open from the inside. Their belongings were left behind: warm clothing, boots, food, journals, and cameras. It was as if the group had fled in the middle of the night, abandoning everything essential for survival in the brutal Siberian cold. NTHE first bodies were found not far from the campsite, barefoot and dressed only in underwear, lying in the snow near the remains of a small fire. Over the following weeks, the remaining victims were discovered scattered further into the forest. Some had fatal internal injuries, broken ribs, fractured skulls, that seemed consistent with the force of a car crash, yet their bodies showed no external wounds. One victim was missing her tongue, another was found with her eyes gone. Others had strange burns on their skin, and traces of radiation were detected on their clothing. NTHE scene raised countless questions. Why would experienced hikers cut their own tent open and flee into the freezing wilderness half-dressed? How did they sustain such catastrophic injuries without outward trauma? Why were some of their clothes radioactive? And why did their bodies show signs of violent force, as if they had been struck by something powerful yet invisible? Theories about the Dyatlov Pass incident have multiplied over the decades. Some believe the hikers were victims of an avalanche that caused them to panic and abandon their tent, though many argue the evidence doesn't fit. The slope was too shallow, and their injuries didn't resemble avalanche trauma. Others have suggested infrasound, low-frequency vibrations caused by wind, that could induce panic and disorientation. Some have blamed secret Soviet military tests, suggesting the group stumbled into the path of experimental weapons. The radiation on their clothing adds weight to this theory, though it has never been confirmed. More outlandish ideas point to extraterrestrial involvement. Eyewitnesses from nearby villages reported seeing strange orange lights in the sky around the time of the hikers' deaths. Combined with the mysterious injuries and missing body parts, some argue that something beyond human understanding occurred that night in the mountains. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation and concluded that an avalanche was the most likely explanation. But many experts and family members of the victims remain unconvinced, pointing out that the original investigators noted no evidence of avalanche activity at the site. NTHE Dyatlov Pass incident endures because every explanation seems to raise more questions than it answers. The hikers' last photographs show them smiling, unaware of the fate awaiting them. Their journals give no sign of trouble, yet something drove 9 skilled mountaineers to flee their shelter into certain death. NTO this day, the icy winds of dead mountains seem to carry whispers of what happened that night. The answers remain buried in the snow, locked in one of history's most enduring mysteries, a haunting reminder that even in an age of science and reason, nature and fate can still conspire to defy explanation. In 1985, on a quiet summer morning in Springfield, Missouri, a mother named Cheryl Levitt and her 19-year-old daughter, Susie Streeter, went missing. Alongside them was Susie's best friend, Stacy McCall, who had planned to spend the night at their home after a night of graduation parties. By the following day, all 3 women had vanished without a trace, leaving behind one of the most infamous unsolved cases in American history, the mystery of the Springfield Three. On June 7th, Stacy and Susie attended several parties celebrating their recent high school graduation. Originally, they had planned to spend the night at a friend's house, but plans shifted, and they decided to stay at Susie's home, where her mother, Cheryl, was already asleep. They arrived in the early hours of June 8th after 2 a.m., but by morning, none of them could be found, and friends who came looking discovered something deeply unsettling. All 3 women's cars were still parked outside, neatly in place. Inside the house, personal belongings, purses, keys, cigarettes, were left behind as if they had only stepped out for a moment. The beds looked as though they had been slept in. The family dog was roaming freely, nervous but unharmed. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken glass, no overturned furniture. It was as though the women had simply been plucked from their lives and erased. NTHE police investigation quickly ballooned, but clues were scarce. Neighbors reported nothing unusual that night. There were no clear signs of a struggle. Phone records revealed a strange, disturbing call had come into the house the next morning, described by one witness as lewd and sexual in nature, but investigators later lost track of the details. The house itself became a challenge for evidence collection, as dozens of friends and relatives had already been in and out, possibly contaminating the scene before police realized the gravity of the disappearance. And over time, multiple theories emerged. One suspect was a convicted criminal named Robert Craig Cox, who had a history of violence against women and was in Springfield at the time. Years later, while in prison, Cox claimed to know what had happened to the three women, even stating that they were all dead, but he refused to reveal further details, insisting he would share the truth only after his mother passed away. To this day, he has not provided concrete evidence, leaving his statements as chilling but unproven. Another theory points toward human trafficking. Springfield, sitting near major interstate highways, is a hub for travelers and truckers, raising the possibility that the women were abducted and taken far away before authorities even realized they were gone. Some investigators believe the lack of struggle inside the home suggests the women either knew their abductor or were lured outside willingly. In the decades since their disappearance, the case has remained cold but not forgotten. Each year, new tips trickle in, but none have led to definitive answers. In 2007, investigators searched a local parking garage after receiving a tip that the women's bodies might be buried beneath it, but ground-penetrating radar scans were inconclusive. The site has never been excavated fully. What makes the case so haunting is the complete absence of resolution. No bodies, no definitive suspects, no crime scene that tells the full story. Families of the women still hold on to hope, but as time passes, the silence grows heavier. It is the kind of mystery that gnaws at investigators because everything looks so ordinary, yet something extraordinary and terrifying happened within those walls. NTHE's story of the Springfield Three has become legend in true crime circles, a textbook example of how three people can vanish in modern America without leaving even a trace behind. For the families, though, it is not legend. It is an open wound, one that remains raw more than 3 decades later. Every birthday, every holiday, every anniversary is another reminder of the night 3 lives disappeared into the dark, taking all the answers with them. In August of 1981, the usually serene coastal town of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, became the backdrop for one of the most disturbing and enduring mysteries in American crime history. It began with the discovery of an unidentified woman's body in the dunes of Provincetown, and for decades she would be known only as the Lady of the Dunes. NHER body was found by a young girl walking her dog. The victim lay face down on a beach towel, her jeans neatly folded beside her. She had no shirt, and her head was turned away from sight. When investigators arrived, the true horror of the scene became clear. Her skull had been crushed by a blunt object, and nearly all of her teeth had been removed, likely to prevent identification. Her hands were also missing, cleanly cut off, further erasing potential forensic evidence. The brutal precision of the mutilations suggested planning and an awareness of investigative techniques, even in an era before modern DNA testing. Despite the effort to conceal her identity, there were still fragments of her life left behind. She was estimated to be between 25 and 40 years old, with auburn hair tied into a ponytail, and her toenails were painted pink. She had expensive dental work, indicating she had once been well cared for. But despite thousands of tips, comparisons with missing persons reports, and even dental records checks across multiple states, no match was ever found. NFOR years, the Lady of the Dunes became a chilling enigma. Police plastered sketches of her reconstructed face across the region, hoping someone would come forward. Countless theories sprang up. Some believed she was a local woman connected to organized crime. Others speculated she might have been a transient, a hitchhiker, or someone passing through with no ties to Provincetown. The lack of definitive answers allowed myths and speculation to spread. One particularly strange theory emerged decades later when author Joe Hill, the son of horror writer Stephen King, noticed something odd while watching the 1975 film Jaws, which was partly filmed on Martha's Vineyard, not far from Provincetown. In one of the crowd scenes, an extra in the background appeared to resemble the composite sketch of the Lady of the Dunes, a young woman with auburn hair and jeans. Hill speculated that the unidentified woman might have been an extra in the film, linking her briefly to Hollywood history. The theory went viral, but authorities ultimately found no evidence to support it. In the 2000s, forensic science gave investigators new hope. Advances in DNA analysis allowed them to extract a profile from her remains. In 2019, the FBI joined the case, using genetic genealogy to attempt to trace her family tree, a process that had recently solved other decades-old cold cases. Finally, in 2022, over 40 years after her death, the Lady of the Dunes was officially identified as Ruth Marie Terry, a 37-year-old woman from Tennessee who had married a man named Guy Rockwell Moldavan. He was later revealed to be a suspect in her murder, having been linked to another gruesome double homicide decades earlier. Ruth had disappeared shortly after marrying him, and evidence strongly suggested he killed her and attempted to erase her identity. Moldavan himself died in 2002, leaving behind unanswered questions, but also a trail of suspicion that never went away. NTHE revelation was bittersweet. For decades, Ruth's family had not known what had become of her, and investigators had been chasing the ghost of a nameless woman. With her identification, the mystery of the Lady of the Dunes shifted from "Who was she?" to "Why was she killed?" Though her suspected killer can no longer be brought to justice, the truth gave closure to a case that had haunted Cape Cod for generations. NTHE image of her body in the sand, her hands missing, her face unrecognizable, lingers as one of the most haunting crime scenes in American history. For locals, the dunes will forever hold the memory of the woman who lay nameless for more than 40 years, embodying both the cruelty of her killer and the relentless determination of investigators who refused to let her be forgotten. In March of 1995, the quiet farming community of Fayetteville, North Carolina, was shaken by the discovery of a grisly crime that has remained unsolved for nearly 3 decades. It began when authorities received a call about a burning car abandoned on a rural dirt road far from any nearby homes. When firefighters extinguished the flames, what they found inside would become one of the most disturbing and perplexing crime scenes in modern history. Inside the charred vehicle were the bodies of 2 young women, later identified as Debbie Wolfe and Patricia Tricia McKay, close friends in their early 20s. Both had been missing for several hours before the car was reported, and their families had begun searching for them that very evening. The fire destroyed most of the vehicle's interior, but forensic investigators determined that both women had been murdered before the fire started. Debbie had died from blunt force trauma to the head, while Tricia had been strangled. Their remains were partially burned, a cruel attempt to erase not only their lives, but also the truth of what had been done to them. What baffled investigators from the beginning was the sheer strangeness of the crime scene. Neither woman had any known enemies, nor were they involved in risky behavior that might explain such violence. The car itself, though registered to one of them, was found several miles from where they were last seen. Even stranger, witnesses later reported seeing the car parked on the road hours before the fire but didn't notice anyone around it. Whoever set the blaze had managed to vanish without a trace. NTHE initial investigation pointed in multiple contradictory directions. Some believe the murders were personal, committed by someone who knew the victims. Others argued the brutality and staging suggested a random predator. The lack of robbery, however, valuables were still inside the car, meant financial gain wasn't the motive. One theory floated was that the women had stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to see, perhaps a drug deal or an illegal exchange happening in the woods, and were silenced as a result. As weeks turned to months, investigators followed dozens of leads. A suspicious man seen in the area on the night of the murders became a prime suspect, but no physical evidence tied him to the crime. Other tips suggested multiple attackers were involved, given the difficulty of subduing two healthy young women at once. Yet each lead ended in frustration, with the case growing colder each passing year. Adding to the mystery were unsettling details that continued to surface. Debbie's mother insisted that her daughter had told her days before the murder that she felt she was being followed. Tricia's friends recalled her mentioning a strange man who had been watching her at a local store. Neither woman seemed overly concerned at the time, but in hindsight, these details painted the image of someone stalking them in the days leading up to the crime. NTHE lack of closure tormented their families. Both mothers became outspoken advocates for answers, appearing in local news interviews and even on national true crime programs, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. Rumors swept through the town, some claiming a serial predator was responsible, others whispering that law enforcement had overlooked a crucial piece of evidence early on. In 2001, the case briefly returned to the spotlight when investigators re-examined the charred vehicle with new forensic techniques. Tiny fragments of DNA were recovered from the interior, but unfortunately, the partial profiles were too degraded to match anyone in national databases. The discovery gave hope but no resolution, leaving the haunting sense that the killer, or killers, might still be walking free. NFOR the community. The double murder was not just shocking but almost paralyzing. Parents warned their daughters not to drive alone at night. Couples refused to go walking in the woods where the car had been found. The very geography of Fayetteville seemed stained by the mystery. What once were peaceful back roads now carried an aura of dread. NTO this day. The case remains unsolved. Every few years, detectives publicly reopen the file, hoping advances in technology or new witnesses will finally break the silence. Both families, though aged and weary, continued to push for justice, refusing to let Debbie and Trisha's names be forgotten. NTHE burned car remains the defining image of the case, a tomb of steel and ash hiding the truth of what really happened that night. Investigators still speak of it in hushed tones. The eerie quiet of the woods, the strange absence of footprints or tire marks, the unnatural stillness of a fire set with clinical intent. For those who worked the scene, it is not just another unsolved case, but one of the most haunting puzzles of their careers. And even now, decades later, the question lingers in Fayetteville. Who killed Debbie and Trisha, and why did they need to erase them with fire? Until those questions are answered, the crime scene will remain an open wound in the town's history, a mystery that still whispers from the ashes. In 2002, in the small town of Toole County, Montana, ranch workers made a discovery that would puzzle investigators for years. Just before dawn, while checking on cattle near a stretch of open prairie, they stumbled upon the body of a man lying near a broken-down pickup truck. At first, it looked like a tragic accident, someone who had collapsed after car trouble. But when police arrived, the scene revealed something far stranger. NTHE man was later identified as David Lewis, a 38-year-old accountant from Dallas, Texas. The mystery began with the simple fact that David was never supposed to be in Montana at all. His family believed he was home in Dallas preparing for a business trip. Instead, he had somehow driven more than 1,000 miles north into rural Montana without telling anyone where he was going. NTHE condition of the body made things even more confusing. David was found lying face down, dressed neatly in a pressed white shirt and slacks, but his shoes were missing. The truck was locked, and his wallet, ID, and keys were gone. There were no signs of robbery or struggle, and the ground around him showed no indication of a chase or fight. His cause of death was listed as undetermined, with investigators unable to prove whether he had collapsed naturally, been poisoned, or killed by some more unusual means. When detectives tried to trace his last known movements, the mystery only deepened. According to credit card records and witness accounts, David had driven erratically across multiple states in the days before his death. He was spotted in Amarillo, Texas, then later in Oklahoma, and finally in Montana, though no one knew why. Gas receipts suggested he rarely stopped, as if someone or something was driving him forward in a panic. Back in Dallas, his wife revealed that David had recently been troubled. He spoke of feeling watched, and in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, he had begun locking every door and window in their house, sometimes even in the middle of the day. Friends reported that he seemed paranoid and unusually distracted, though no one knew the cause. Some theorists suggested he was running from someone. Others believed he was experiencing a mental breakdown. Yet investigators pointed out that nothing in his background, no debts, no criminal activity, no infidelity, suggested why he would suddenly flee across the country. Even stranger were the loose ends. A few days before his body was found, David had been reported missing by his family in Texas. At the same time, police in Amarillo pulled over a man matching his description walking along a highway, but when they approached him, he ran into traffic and vanished into the night. That man was never positively identified, but many believe it was David himself, fleeing in confusion or fear. By the time his body was discovered in Montana, his disappearance had already become national news. But the discovery brought no answers. Toxicology tests revealed no drugs or poisons in his system. Autopsy results ruled out trauma, heart attack, and stroke. The lack of shoes baffled investigators. Why would he walk barefoot across the cold Montana prairie? And the absence of his wallet or ID seemed deliberate, as if he had wanted to erase his identity before dying. NTHE case soon attracted amateur sleuths, many of whom pointed to the eerie similarities between David's final days and other cases of wandering deaths. Individuals who suddenly abandon their lives, travel great distances, and are found dead under mysterious conditions. Some link these cases to undiagnosed mental illness, while others speculate about foul play, secret lives, or even government involvement. For David's family, the lack of answers has been devastating. His wife insists he was not suicidal and had no reason to run. His colleagues described him as steady and meticulous, not someone who would vanish into thin air. The FBI briefly looked into the case, given the interstate element, but ultimately closed their file when no federal crime could be established. What remains most haunting is the silence of the Montana prairie. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, no witnesses who saw him collapse. Just a man, far from home, lying lifeless beside a locked truck that carried no clues. NTO this day, investigators admit they are no closer to solving the riddle than they were in 2002. David Lewis's death has become one of those cases whispered about in both law enforcement circles and late-night forums. A man who seemed to be running from something no one else could see, only to collapse in the middle of nowhere, his reasons forever sealed with him. The mystery lies, not in how he died, but why he was there at all. And until that question is answered, the death of David Lewis will remain one of the most chilling, unexplained cases in modern times. In 1987, the quiet coastal town of Northport, Maine, became the setting of one of the strangest unexplained deaths in American history. A local lobsterman, checking his traps just offshore, noticed something floating in the water early one morning. At first, he thought it was driftwood. But as his boat drew closer, he realized it was the body of a man, fully dressed in a black suit, white shirt and tie, lying face up in the calm ocean waters. NTHE man was identified as John Bingham, a 42-year-old high school teacher from Boston. But what baffled investigators was how he had ended up in Maine at all. John had no ties to Northport, no family there, no business, no reason to make the 3-hour drive north. His car was never found, and no one recalled seeing him arrive. An even stranger was his appearance. Despite floating in the ocean, his clothes were neatly pressed and dry above the waist, as though he had been gently placed into the water rather than struggling or drowning. His shoes were missing, and his bare feet showed no cuts or abrasions, unusual given the rocky shoreline nearby. His pockets were empty, but his wedding ring remained on his finger, suggesting robbery was not the motive, and the autopsy only deepened the mystery. His lungs showed no signs of drowning, and there was no water in his airway. There were no wounds, no signs of a struggle, no toxins, and no natural cause of death that could be determined. The coroner listed his death simply as undetermined. When investigators retraced his final days, they uncovered a haunting sequence of events. John had left Boston on a Friday evening after telling his wife he was going for a drive to clear his head. He never explained what was troubling him, though colleagues later said he had been distracted at work, often staring blankly at the classroom walls as if lost in thought. His wife assumed he would be back by morning. Instead, he vanished. The next confirmed sighting came from a gas station clerk in Portland, Maine, who remembered a man matching John's description, buying fuel and asking for directions to the coast. Beyond that, there were no more sightings until his body appeared in the ocean near Northport 2 days later. Haunting details of his case spawned numerous theories. Some believed John had suffered a mental break and wandered into the water voluntarily, but investigators pointed out that his body showed no signs of immersion struggle, no flailing, no defensive wounds, no water inhalation, almost as if he had been placed in the water after death. Others wondered if he had been lured to Maine under false pretenses. His family insisted he had no secret life, but detectives could never explain the missing car, the missing shoes, or the fact that he was dressed so formally, as though for a meeting or appointment. Conspiracy-minded locals even tied his case to the series of strange drownings and disappearances along the New England coast during the 1980s, sometimes called the Smiley Face killings in later years, though no connection was ever proven. NFOR John's widow, the most chilling detail was the last thing he ever said to her. Before leaving that night, he reportedly whispered, "I just need to see for myself." When she asked what he meant, he smiled faintly, kissed her forehead, and walked out the door. What he was going to see, or who he was meeting, remains a mystery. His car was never recovered. His cause of death remains unknown. And the cold waters off Northport keep their silence. And even now, decades later, residents recall the strange case of the Boston teacher found floating in the ocean, dressed like a man on his way to an appointment that never happened. His story has become one of Maine's most unsettling unsolved mysteries. A death that raises far more questions than it answers. In the summer of 1995, the city of Phoenix, Arizona, was shaken by the strange and unexplained death of Teresa Terry Jackson, a 29-year-old nurse known for her friendly personality and dedication to her patients. What happened to her remains one of the city's eeriest unsolved mysteries. On the morning of July 18th, Terry was scheduled to begin her shift at St. Mary's Hospital. When she failed to show up, co-workers grew concerned. She was known for being punctual to the point of obsession. By early afternoon, her family reported her missing. NTHAT evening Her car, a white Honda Civic, was discovered parked neatly on the shoulder of Interstate 17, just outside Phoenix city limits. The hazard lights were flashing. Inside the vehicle, investigators found her purse, her wallet, and her hospital ID badge, all untouched. The driver's seat was adjusted for her height, the car was in good working order, and the doors were locked. There was no sign of struggle. NTHE following day, her body was discovered in the desert, 2 miles from where her car was abandoned. She was lying face up in the sand, arms at her sides, fully dressed in her nurse's uniform, with no visible injuries. Her shoes were placed neatly beside her, as if carefully removed. NTHE autopsy reports stunned investigators. There were no signs of trauma, no drugs, no alcohol, no natural medical issues. Her heart was healthy, her organs intact. She had not died from dehydration or exposure. Her body had been in the desert for less than 24 hours. The official cause of death was listed as undetermined. What made her case even stranger were the bizarre details surrounding her final moments. When detectives spoke with her family, they learned that Terry had made a disturbing phone call to her sister just an hour before disappearing. In a whisper, she said, "Nah, I can't explain, but they're here. They've been here all along. I just need to step away for a bit." When asked who they were, Terry reportedly said, "You'll understand soon. Just don't come looking." Then she hung up, and theories began to swirl. Some investigators believe Terry may have suffered a sudden psychological break, but her medical history showed no evidence of mental illness. Others speculated she may have been stalked, lured into the desert, and poisoned with a substance that left no trace. But toxicologists could find nothing. Her coworkers added another eerie layer. In the week before her death, Terry had confided that she felt watched at night. She told a close friend that when she parked her car after work, she often saw a dark sedan with tinted windows idling near her apartment, though when she tried to approach, it would drive away. Adding to the mystery, several Phoenix residents later reported seeing a woman in nurse's scrubs walking barefoot along the desert road the night she disappeared. Each assumed she was heading home from a late shift. None stopped to help. NTO this day, no explanation has been found. Terry's car had no fingerprints other than her own. There was no evidence of kidnapping, no indication of assault, no motive, and no clear cause of death. NTHE image of her carefully placed shoes beside her body haunts investigators. Some believe it symbolized a voluntary act, that she removed them intentionally before lying down in the desert to die. Others think it points to an unknown ritualistic element, that whoever or whatever was involved wanted the scene to appear deliberate, staged. NHER last words, "They've been here all along," continue to baffle her family. Some wonder if she was speaking, metaphorically, about hidden dangers in her life. Others whisper about more chilling possibilities, that she encountered something she wasn't meant to see, or someone who silenced her in a way science couldn't detect. Almost 30 years later, the case of Teresa Jackson remains open, filed among Arizona's coldest cases. A nurse who cared for others every day of her life died in a way that no one can explain. Her body left in the desert sun, her cause of death erased as though it were never meant to be known. In 2003, the quiet coastal town of Rockport, Massachusetts became home to one of the most puzzling, unexplained deaths in New England history, the case of Professor Daniel Whitaker, a respected historian at Harvard University who specialized in maritime folklore. Whitaker was known for his eccentricity. His colleagues described him as brilliant but reclusive, fascinated with obscure legends about lost sailors, ghost ships, and cursed waters. In the spring of that year, he rented a small cottage overlooking the ocean in Rockport, telling friends he wanted to finish his life's work in peace. On the evening of October 12th, Whitaker attended a local town meeting where he spoke briefly about his research. He appeared calm, cheerful, and even joked with a few residents. Around 9:30 p.m., he left the meeting and walked toward his cottage. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. NTHE next morning, his body was discovered on the beach, kneeling upright in the sand, facing the ocean, as though frozen in prayer. His arms hung loosely at his sides, his eyes wide open, staring at the horizon. The medical examiner later noted that his expression was one of absolute terror, unlike anything they had seen before. NTHE scene raised countless questions. His body bore no wounds, no signs of drowning, no signs of poisoning. His heart and lungs were healthy. The sand beneath him showed no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away. It was as though he had simply knelt down, looked out to sea, and died instantly. Inside his cottage, police discovered his study littered with notes, journals, and dozens of books on maritime myths. The most chilling discovery was his final handwritten entry, left open on his desk. The tide whispers differently tonight. They are not gone. They were never gone. When the ocean breathes in, something breathes out. And pinned beside his notes was an old map of the Massachusetts coastline, marked with dozens of red circles extending far into the Atlantic. Scribbled across the top were the words, "The waters remember." Locals began to speculate wildly. Some believed Whitaker had succumbed to madness brought on by isolation and obsession. Others claimed he had uncovered something he shouldn't have, some truth about the sea that had driven him to death. The fishermen who lived near Whitaker's cottage added to the unease. He reported seeing strange blue lights hovering above the ocean around midnight on the night Whitaker died. He described them as lanterns floating just above the waves, drifting silently before vanishing. The Coast Guard searched the waters but found nothing. NTHE autopsy provided no answers. His stomach was empty, his bloodstream clean, his body unmarked. The cause of death was listed as sudden cardiac arrest of unknown origin. But doctors admitted it was unusual for a healthy 52-year-old man with no medical history to collapse so suddenly, especially in such an unnatural position. NTO this day, the mystery remains unsolved. Was it a natural death in an unsettling posture, a psychological breakdown that ended in tragedy, or something stranger, An encounter with the very folklore he studied so obsessively? NTHE image of Professor Whitaker kneeling in the sand, his eyes locked on the endless horizon, still lingers in the town's memory. Some Rockport residents say that on certain stormy nights, if you walk the beach at midnight, you can hear whispers in the wind, like pages turning in a book, or a voice repeating words carried from the sea. The waters remember. In 1987, the remote logging town of Cedar Hollow, Oregon, became the stage for a death so bizarre that investigators, decades later, still whisper about it in hushed tones. It was the case of Margaret Ellison, a 41-year-old schoolteacher known for her warmth, intelligence, and almost obsessive punctuality. On December 3rd, Margaret failed to show up for class. At first, her absence was dismissed as illness, but when she didn't answer phone calls, the sheriff's office was asked to check her home. What they found would haunt them forever. Margaret was discovered seated at her kitchen table, her body upright, her hands folded neatly in front of her as if she were waiting for someone. A half-eaten slice of pie sat untouched on her plate, and a candle had burned all the way down to melted wax. But Margaret herself was stone still, dead, eyes wide open, lips parted in a faint smile. NTHE cause of death was a mystery. There were no wounds, no toxins in her blood, no signs of a struggle. The kitchen windows and doors were locked from the inside. It was as if life had simply stopped while she was mid-meal. Then came the strangest detail. Every clock in her house, wall clocks, alarm clocks, even her wristwatch, had stopped at 11:33 p.m. None of them were broken. When rewound, they all worked perfectly. Yet for reasons no one could explain, every timepiece in her home had frozen at that exact moment. Investigators combed through her belongings and discovered Margaret had been keeping a private journal for years. The entries from the weeks before her death grew increasingly erratic. She wrote of waking at night to the sound of knocking on her windows, though no one was ever there. She described shadows moving in the corners of her vision, and once wrote, "They don't come from outside. They're already here, waiting. They tell me a time. 11:33. That's when I'll know." The night she died, a neighbor reported seeing a dim orange glow flickering through her curtains, as though a fire had been lit inside. When police arrived the next morning, there was no fire, no damage, no smoke, just Margaret, frozen at the table, surrounded by silent clocks. NHER autopsy concluded, sudden death of undetermined cause. But whispers spread quickly in Cedar Hollow. Some residents swore that 11:33 wasn't random. It was the exact time a massive logging accident had occurred in town 20 years earlier, when 13 workers were crushed beneath collapsing timber. Locals believed the forest itself carried something restless, and that Margaret, sensitive and solitary, had become its chosen witness. And even today, her house remains empty. No one has lived there since. Realtors say buyers always back out after their first visit. Some claim that the clocks inside still reset themselves to 11:33 no matter how many times batteries are replaced. and former students of Margaret visit her grave every year, leaving small clocks and watches on the headstone. Most of them, by the following day, have stopped ticking. NTHE death of Margaret Ellison remains unexplained. Was it a natural heart failure in uncanny circumstances? A psychological collapse? Or something older, tied to the land, the trees, and the memory of tragedy? What lingers most is her faint smile, frozen forever, as though she had seen something in that final moment. Something terrifying, or perhaps something she had been waiting for all along. Then the clocks, all stopped at the same second, still marking the silence of that night. And